and welcome back to Unplanned. Today we're having a wonderful visit in South Station, right in downtown Boston, where we are going to meet with Joe Barr, who is here at Amtrak, and we're going to learn all about what Amtrak is up to and some of their plans for the future. So, Joe, welcome to Unplanned.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you, and thank you very much. First of all, why don't you tell us what your title is, so that I don't say it incorrectly?
Okay, sure. So my title is Director of Network Development East, and that means I'm responsible for coordinating and facilitating our network expansion and enhancement projects up and down the East Coast. And that really means everything from Quebec all the way down to Florida. So not just the Northeast Corridor, which a lot of people think about in terms of Amtrak service, but really the full totality of everything we do up and down the East Coast.
Well, that sounds like a pretty intense job. How long have you been here? Because I know we know each other back from your days at the city of Cambridge, but how long have you been here at Amtrak?
So it's been just about a year and a half. I started in late October of 2022. So like I said, coming up on the year and a half.
And what's the experience been like so far?
It's been great. It's a really exciting time to be working on intercity passenger rail. There's a lot of money available and a lot of excitement about the topic and about being able to, improve what we do already and add new services and really, make Amtrak into a national railroad beyond the long distance service we operate that runs across the country, but provide additional frequencies and start adding sort of more shorter distance corridor services in other locations around the country. Obviously, my focus is on the East Coast, but we have similar work going on in the central part of the country, on the West Coast, the Mountain West, the Southwest. And so really the opportunity to partner with our state partners and agencies and really be able to kind of grow the network in a much more significant way than we've ever been able to do in the past.
Well, that's all very impressive, and I don't think I fully appreciated that you're all the way from Quebec down to the tip of Florida.
Yep.
So much energy and attention is focused on that Northeast Corridor, sort of Northern Virginia up through the Boston area. This show is not and never has been about politics, but it is true that Joe Biden is a big rail fan. Mm-hmm. I think that's a fair statement. A lot of money has become available in the last X number of years, certainly during the COVID pandemic. Why don't you just briefly review what that money is and how that compares to, say, the prior time that we remember from our youth when Amtrak maybe struggled a little bit more for funding and other things?
Yeah, so the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the IIJA, or some people prefer Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or BIL, had $66 billion in it for intercity passenger rail, which is a lot of money compared to what's come before. It's really it's pretty much the same amount or a little bit more than Amtrak ever got over the course of its prior 50 so years at the time the bill was passed in November of 2021. And so we don't get all that money directly. About a third of it is specifically targeted at Amtrak, but really for just state of good repair, replacing a lot of our fleet, upgrading stations to meet ADA standards, making sure that we have bridges that need to be replaced get replaced, things like that. The other 2/3, or about $44 billion, is allocated for discretionary grants that the FRA, Federal Railroad Administration, is going to be or has been soliciting for, and they've already got tens of billions of dollars that they've awarded that people are starting to be able to spend to make those improvements. But there's also money in there for service expansion and bringing infrastructure that doesn't currently have passenger rail, up to snuff to be able to do that, helping the freight railroads preserve their capacity while we add passenger service, and being able to, like I said earlier, grow the network and really add to what we already do.
Well, before we get on to growing the network, because I will say, as my own background in urban planning, I'm a rail fan. I like the idea of not only of public transit, but the idea that we can get more people into a rail car than we could in however many miles of road width. So those are all very positive. So we'll get on to growing the network, but let's spend a second just on the state of good repair and on infrastructure in general. My sense of Amtrak is that it has always, at least historically, struggled with keeping the tracks safe, keeping the bridges safe, and keeping the signaling safe. How satisfied are you with where we are in terms of our investments?
Sure. So,
right now?
I mean, obviously, it goes without saying, and I really truly see this every day working here, that safety is our number one priority in a way that, as much as, I've worked on, a lot of safety projects in prior jobs and, Vision Zero, that, Amtrak takes it incredibly seriously because trains are big, they move quickly and they stop slowly. And so, bad things could happen really easily if you don't pay very close attention. And I think, we really do take that incredibly seriously. Every meeting we do, even just a group of planners meeting to talk about a project, starts with a safety briefing. Even simple things like making sure you don't trip over the plug, that's draped across the floor if there is one. So, obviously, so I think safety, we have very well covered, and there's been upgrades to technology, upgrades to training, those kinds of things. And I'm not the expert on that certainly, but I see it every day when I just interacting with colleagues. So I think on that front we're in very good shape. But I think we've struggled historically with funding and with continuity of funding. I think that's been part of the challenge. Is when you know you're going to get a certain amount every year, you can plan for that. You can build staff capacity to, implement projects and move them from planning to design to construction. When you have, here's a few $1 billion, but then the next year you don't get that, and then you go a while without that, it's really hard to sort of get up that momentum. So I think what we're really hoping to see, both on the sort of what we already do and the future, is to see some, sort of a regular injection, not these kind of episodic injections, but a regular process of having funds. We may not get $66 billion all at once like we did in the IJA, but if we can just kind of have a higher level of expectation of what's going to come in the future, I think that's really going to help us be able to get ahead of what we're trying to do rather than always playing catch up, which I think people have been trying for it's almost 53 years since Amtrak was started. People have been trying to keep up with stuff. It's extremely hardworking, well-intentioned, but just having that sort of variability, I think, makes it really challenging to get the work done consistently. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize about Amtrak is that we are technically a private for-profit company. It's just that we're owned by the federal government. The preferred stock is owned by the federal government. But we are tasked with trying to generate profit. We are tasked with trying to operate obviously as efficiently as we can. Obviously, we have a public mission to serve the nation with passenger rail, but ultimately, it is we're not actually a government agency, although we are owned by US DOT.
Well, we're going to get on to expansion of the service, but how would you assess currently, at the current point in time, the appetite for rail? What's the current mood around rail service? My impression has always been that the airlines really did a number on the railroads about 50 or 60 or 70 years ago. Where are we today? Maybe my sense is not even correct there.
Yeah, I would say that, as I travel around, Massachusetts and, to other parts of my territory on the East Coast, I can't even think of anyone who I've run into who's sort of not supportive of passenger rail. They may have concerns about, cost of investment or how efficient it might be, those kinds of things. But generally, people like trains. I know it sounds a little sort of trite, but it's true as far as I can tell. People do like trains. And I think the other thing that's happened is that over the years since the expansion of the highway network and the interstate system, as well as the airline industry, and particularly the deregulation of the airline industry, and sort of the price competitiveness that occurred to some extent as a result of that, those modes are now very congested, and the experience of driving long distances, the experience of flying places is not necessarily all that pleasant, not necessarily all that reliable. And so people are looking for sort of options beyond that. And so I think people look, some people look at Europe or Japan or other parts of the world where they see good trains, or they just look, at other parts of the country and they say, well, gee, I know someone who lives in Boston and they seem to be able to get around, by train, but I live, somewhere, in the Southeast, and I'm have more difficulty getting around by train. So I think there's a lot of receptiveness. I think people, when we talk to state government, when we talk to private citizens, anyone who's interested in the topic, there's a lot of enthusiasm for it and a lot of support. It's so we're trying to deliver on that support by actually providing people with good services. I remember a meeting I was at for a project we're working on to reconnect Scranton to New York City by rail, and one of the I think the chief of staff or the congressman there, Matt Cartwright, said, we got rid of the train because of the interstate system, and now we're trying to put back the train because of the interstate system. Because at the time it seemed like, oh, well, this is the future. We'll all drive, it's going to be great. It turned out maybe not so great for a variety of reasons. And now the interstate, and the highway network is very congested, and people don't like traveling that way, and so they're like, oh, give me another option. So it's sort of interesting the way it comes full circle in the end.
Yeah. So let's dig into some of the ways in which you're going to provide this service and expand service and bring those new customers onto Amtrak trains. So tell us some of the things you're thinking about, and some of the things you're working on,
Sure.
and some of the things we can look forward to.
Yeah. So the one thing I wanted to say, sort of at a very high level, is Amtrak has this strategic goal of doubling our ridership by 2040 from where we were a year or two ago, and we're making good progress on that. Most of our routes are back to or exceeding the ridership they had pre-pandemic, which was obviously a big milestone for us in terms of showing that this is not something that's been long-term damage to the ridership we have as a result of the pandemic. But like I said, we're aiming for that doubling, which would bring us to about 66 million riders a year. So that's kind of our overall strategic goal, which is really critical. So it's just trying to work with everyone and anyone who's interested in that to try to add new services.
So we were talking about sort of relative strengths and weaknesses of different zones on the East Coast, and I'm just curious what your impression has been, partly because maybe where there's less strength in the rail world, those are greater opportunities to build a network and to sort of get a mindset that rail actually is a workable option there.
Yeah, and I think that what I've seen is a lot of states that traditionally maybe haven't been involved in passenger rail, realizing that this is an opportunity for them, particularly with this significant federal funding out there, and hopefully more coming in the future, that this is something that they can use to help them deal with their mobility or economic development or congestion problems. Like the state of Virginia has invested heavily in passenger rail, and I think that's because it was either that or start looking at widening I-95, which would be, I think, a poor decision on several different levels. But I think for them, it was financially that was going to be incredibly expensive given the surrounding land uses to do that. And they said, well, we have this rail corridor, which which already had service, but they've enhanced that, and they have a lot of plans to enhance it in the future. And they've committed a lot of state funding, but they also got a $730 million grant awarded to them late last year to help sort of fully fund the first couple of phases of that program. So there's a lot of investment happening on the state's parts, but now like I said, they see this large investment coming from the federal government. I mean, I think the other thing, and this varies by location obviously, is that people are I think we're realizing climate change is real, and that they need to address that both in terms of adaptation and also making sure that the way people are traveling is cleaner, and so I think they view rail as part of that solution, giving redundancy to their systems, other ways to get around, but also giving people a cleaner option for how to get around. And Amtrak is obviously the service we operate in the Northeast Corridor is already electrified, but we're working towards a net zero goal for 2035 and really looking really closely at different propulsion technologies and how can we get away from diesel powered trains for the rest of the network. It's challenging because that's a very long-standing and proven technology, but I think we've obviously come to the realization that this is something that we need to not just wait for the rest of the industry to figure out and then we'll hop on board with that, but really take a leadership role and make sure that we're the ones leading the charge on developing it, because I think we take a lot of pride and see the benefits of having a more environmentally friendly way to get around.
Which leads me to the question. First of all, it's wonderful to hear that, and that if you go online, you see a lot of videos, particularly of the new Acela service. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about the Acela service, but the new trains that are, I think, French in origin, but making their way onto American tracks, and I think there's a lot of excitement there. But that does get me to my next topic, which is high-speed rail, generally speaking.
Yep.
I know there's efforts in the Northeast Corridor, but where does Amtrak stand on the whole position of higher speed rail, maybe?
Yes. Well, yeah, and again, I'm not the expert on this.
Yeah.
Our Senior Vice President, Andy Byford, who joined us about, I guess a year ago, it was April of last year that he came on board, is certainly the guru of that for Amtrak, and as well as being the guru of a lot of other things, it's sort of, it was a great day when he joined the company, because I think it really showed how excited people are about what Amtrak is capable of and might be capable of in the future. But yeah, we're leaning in very much to high-speed rail in a few different ways. I mean, just the creation of that group and hiring Andy. And we've announced that we're partnered with the Texas Central project between Houston and Dallas, and sort of working to try to make that real. It's been discussed for a while, but it did get funding through the Corridor ID program to sort of move forward into the next phases. So that's a good example of kind of new greenfield, alignments. We're also working really hard to, make the Northeast Corridor faster, so that we can, take advantage of the infrastructure we have, and whether that's upgrading certain sections of the alignment just to sort of make incremental changes for faster speeds, whether that's the Frederick Douglass Tunnel in Baltimore, which will allow much greater reliability and some speed increases for trains traveling in and out of Baltimore, or just all the state of good repair projects that we're doing. We're also working, we'll be launching soon, a study that my group will be managing, looking at the sort of southeastern Connecticut, southwestern Connecticut, southwestern Rhode Island, section of the Northeast Corridor, which is where it's both one of the slower areas of the corridor because of all the curves, but also very close to the water in a lot of locations, and so it's vulnerable to climate change in the future. So we really need to figure out what's the long-term plan for this section of the NEC. So we'll be looking, working very, very closely with local communities who have a lot of concerns about what the impacts might be, but we'll be looking at how can we upgrade the existing alignment, or potentially looking at new alignments, to sort of give us a higher speed travel through there. So I think we're definitely, we see high-speed rail as sort of the future for a lot of what we're doing, along with just providing more frequency on existing routes and upgrading speeds incrementally. Like on the service between St. Louis and Chicago, we went from a 90-mile-an-hour top speed to 110-mile-per-hour top speed, and that saved a lot of time for those travelers. It's not true high-speed rail, but it's it's a lot better and a lot more reliable as a result. So I think there's a whole series of things that we're working on. And what Andy Byford always says is that his view is once people see one true high-speed rail project in the US, they're going to want a lot more. So I think his view is if we can just get one of these projects like Texas Central or California High-Speed Rail in operation, that it will then people will be like, oh, this is what I've been looking for, and we'll see a growth of it, more like what we've seen in other countries. So we're really hopeful that we can get that sort of initial project going and really show people what's possible.
It struck me that one of the great strengths that the United States has is it has so much land, that there are so many regions that are roughly the size of France, and therefore easily connectable. Whether it's the sort of Chicago, St. Louis area, the Northeast Corridor, a lot of stuff happening out in California. Texas all by itself sort of fits that category. It just seems like feels like that's about the right distance for a train trip, basically.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, people talk about longer distance high-speed rail, and I'm not saying that that's not something that should be considered, but I think the sweet spot is 500 miles, 600 miles, that kind of thing. And yeah, you look around, there's all these mega regions. You think about the sort of southeast and Atlanta, Charlotte, down to Florida. There's a lot of good connections potentially there, and all the ones you mentioned as well. The Pacific Northwest, they also got funding to the states to look at a sort of high-speed rail service, sort of Cascadia service connecting Vancouver to Portland. So there's a lot of different ideas out there. Obviously, they all require work and money to actually happen. But our hope, I think in general, and I think this is hope for a lot of people involved in the industry, is really that people start to see what's possible, and then they start to support funding and the impacts. These aren't just magically happen with no impact, but they certainly should be less impactful than all the highways we built over the last 50, 60 years.
And one last just general topic to just touch on is private rail. There's now privately funded rail. Florida, I know, I think there's some things happening out in the Las Vegas area. Where, not so much where do you stand, but what do you think about the idea? Obviously, we have Amtrak as a corporation, but it's government owned in that sense. How should we all think about it?
Yeah, so I guess the way I think about it, and I think this is generally the way Amtrak thinks about it. I mean, obviously it's a competitor, which is a challenge, but competition should be a good thing, right? If it should make us up our game as well, because we know that there's other options out there, and I don't think anything's come to fruition yet, but even some of the Class 1 freight railroads have said, well, we could run passenger trains too if you wanted us to some of the states. So that's out there, and I think like I said, it's competition is a good thing in terms of making sure everyone's doing the best job they can, and people recognizing that there are options. I think the other thing is making passenger rail relevant to more people helps everybody. So if you live in Florida, what you've had for the last however many years is a couple of long distance trains operated by Amtrak every day. And even if we do the best job we can and those are run very well, that's still just 2 trains a day in each direction running in Florida. Brightline's running dozens of trains, and so more people are seeing the potential for passenger rail. So even though it's not Amtrak, and obviously would we want to be running that many trains in Florida? Of course we would. But the fact that somebody's doing it means that more people have ridden a train, more people know what it's like, more people have friends or family or coworkers or whoever, more politicians have ridden a train. So I think it's not necessarily a rising tide helps all boats kind of situation, but it definitely, the relevance of intercity rail to the country increases, and I think that's a good thing for everything. And that's something that I definitely heard our CEO, Stephen Gardner, talk about, is just, we need more people that just care about passenger rail. And and understand how important it is, and that's why we have this goal of doubling ridership. Obviously it's important commercially and financially, but it's also just if we've got 66 million people riding our trains every day, or every year, sorry, every day, that would be great. But that's, I mean, obviously some of them are riding more than once, but sort of that's a lot of people who are benefiting from the service and find it relevant, find it useful, choosing to make that decision, and ultimately that's what's going to help us become, to grow and become even more important to the nation, and not sort of be viewed as sort of a side light to everything else that's going on. So I think that's a really important aspect of a service like Brightline is just adding to the pie.
Well, Joe Barr, I just want to thank you for spending some time with us on Unplanned.
Great to chat.
It's a topic that I was so excited that I was going to be able to come in here and talk to you about. And I think I'm going to get the chance to walk around a little bit around South Station, which is one of the great railroad stations in North America.
It is.
And I assume it's one of the oldest as well. I don't know that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know all the history that well, but yeah, it's definitely one of our older stations. But it's a beautiful station, and it serves us and the commuter rail very well.
Well, I will say personally, as a comment from me, as the host of Unplanned, I wish you all the best of luck in everything you're doing, because I'm a strong believer in passenger rail. And
yes, well, and hopefully the folks that watch your podcast will, are and will continue to be supporters of Amtrak and just passenger rail in general, because we want everyone to be engaged, and we want everyone to ride our trains.
So in the old days, by which I mean not that long ago, this was all open air above our heads, right?
Correct, yeah.
You left the old historic station, which is back here, and you were out in the open air.
Yeah, you're out in the open, and then the platforms and canopies started. The platforms are a little shorter than they used to be because of all this construction, but basically, yeah, this was all open to the air, and then the bus terminal was several hundred feet down that way, and now it'll all be connected and undercover with, I think, new retail and a lot more people coming through here. You'll have all the people living and working in the new building as well.
All right, so I'm told that there's an Acela train over there,
and
we're going to walk over there, and I can't resist but ask, when will the new Acela train sets be running up and down for passenger service? Because if you look on YouTube, you can see them running, but
Yeah,
I assume those are tests.
They're doing a lot of testing. The plan, and I can only tell you what I know, which is the same as what's been announced publicly, which is we're hoping to start having them in passenger service by the end of this calendar year. It'll take a while to get them all up and running. One of the things about the new Acelas is that they'll be longer than the current Acelas, so there'll be more capacity.
Yeah, no, I'm just getting the shot here. So.
And we'll have more of them, so we'll be able to run more service. So once we do have them all up and running, they're going to be, these are great, and they've worked really well, but they'll be, like I said, it'll be a huge enhancement to the service, new customer amenities, and like I said, additional service.
And then we're going to just touch on one other topic before we conclude our tour of South Station, which is wonderful. And if you're into trains at all, this is one of the great stations in North America. Climate change, you mentioned it briefly. Obviously, we're on a coastal city here. Weather does seem to be more extreme now, and that would impact a huge amount of what you all are trying to do. How are you all thinking about this at Amtrak?
Yeah, so it's a daily topic of discussion. It's really important to the company, both on the sort of helping fight climate change by providing environmentally sustainable ways of getting around, and obviously the Acela and all the trains we operate from South Station are all electric, other than the Lakeshore Limited. But it's also obviously in terms of adaptation. Our sustainability group has done a vulnerability assessment for the Northeast Corridor, and they're now in the process of doing a vulnerability assessment for our entire network of 21,000 miles that we run on across the country. So yeah, we see it as, we're both part of the solution, but we also need to make sure that our services are, up to the challenge of climate change and are adapted, and that we're doing everything we can to make them as reliable as possible. So when you look around, there are a lot of railroad tracks that were built next to rivers, that were built next to oceans. The Pacific Surfliner has had multiple suspensions over the last 2 years due to beach erosion and landslides, and so we really see the impacts every day, and so we need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to make our services, like I said, be up to that challenge.
Yeah, one of the most beautiful parts of the Northeast Corridor is along the Connecticut coastline, but you can't be on the train and not think, if that water level rises, there's some serious potential problems here.
Yeah, and the things, even the electric wires that they run on, extreme heat can cause problems for those, as well as for the railroad tracks expanding, and potentially making sure that it's safe to run on them. So there's a whole host of things that we have to look at, but again, it's something we're incredibly focused on and have been focused on for a little while. So I think we are ahead of the curve in trying to make sure that we, keep up with what we need to do.
Well, Joe Barr, it's been a fascinating time spending with you here at South Station, learning all about what you do and what Amtrak is up to, and what the future looks like for passenger rail here in the United States. So very, very exciting, and I just want to thank you again for spending some time with us.
No, thank you. It was great to have a chance to chat with you and update you on what we're doing, and hopefully it's interesting to your listeners and viewers.
Absolutely.